Welcome to Last Call with Jamion Christian. Our guest today, Alan Stein. Alan will be a familiar name to many inside the basketball business, but it's how he has taken those lessons learned through sport and is applying them now into speaking and writing. We'll talk a lot about that today. Alan is the author of Raise Your Game, a look inside the locker room to see how the best raise their games. I've been following Alan from his very beginning as one of the first performance coaches that I can remember. Strength training, speed work, you name it, Alan was on it. I've watched him have opportunities with guys like Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and Kobe Bryant, and I'm looking forward to having a great show. Alan, thanks for joining us.
Oh my goodness, it's my pleasure. I'm excited for a fun conversation.
Man, how did you, one of the things that I remember when you were first at Montrose Christian, and we'll just dive right into it today. And I remember coming and watching workouts, and you were there like stretching with the guys and putting them through different skill work. And, every time we would come into Montrose, they would say, you've got to go watch our strength and conditioning coach. And this is when it wasn't really that common. So how did you sort of dive into strength and conditioning? And really, I really feel like you're a pioneer of sort of that for men's basketball at the beginning.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Well, basketball was my first love. And I vividly remember falling in love with the game at 5 years old when my parents signed me up for my first recreation team. And was so thankful that I've been able to not only, build a career, but build an extraordinary life around the game that I love. And I played at Watkins Mill High School in Gaithersburg, Maryland. And towards the latter part of high school, when I was 100% committed to making sure that I could play the game at the next level, I started to dabble in strength and conditioning and lifting weights and plyometrics and running and conditioning and agility training. And I was so fascinated by improving my own explosiveness and strength and power and conditioning. And I carried that love through going to Elon College. It's now Elon University. And over the last couple of years of high school and my 4 years at Elon, I started to really have a really strong love for the strength and conditioning and performance side of the game. So when it was obvious to me that when my career at Elon was over, so were my formal basketball playing days, I figured what could be better for a career choice than to combine my original love of basketball with this newfound love of strength and conditioning. So I just decided upon graduation to anoint myself a basketball performance coach and move back here to the DC area and dove in head first. And thankfully, as you know so well, the DMV area is one of the top metro areas for youth and high school basketball. So there were no shortage of players and coaches and opportunities for me to work on this new trade. And was very fortunate to get opportunities at Montrose Christian and at DeMatha. Spent 13 years combined on those two benches and really learned a lot from both of those head coaches and both of those programs. Those were very formative years for me. But what was most important was it gave me a laboratory, if you will, to really start working on my craft. And because I've always identified as a basketball player, what was most important to me was to create a training program that was specific for basketball, but also was one that would resonate and be enjoyable to do by basketball players. And that was really where I put my focus.
Yeah. What people don't realize is, those early days, it was almost all about football, strength and conditioning. There was really no knowledge about basketball and how to work basketball players differently. I mean, I remember lifting as a basketball player. We basically did Olympic lifts only. And it wasn't very specific. So when you came on the scene, it was really unique. What's that conversation like when you go into Stu Vetter the first time, trying to convince him to allow you to work with his team?
Well, I'm going to put a pin in that and I'll answer that because it's a fun story. But, as far as you nailed it, that was so insightful that, in the late 90s and early 2000s, there really weren't many people doing basketball strength and conditioning. It was always an iteration of football. And I knew as a player, and I knew with the players I was working with, that was a major turnoff to them. They like myself, they identified as basketball players, and they didn't want to train like football players or bodybuilders or Olympic lifters. They wanted to train something that would improve their, abilities on the court. So, for me, the number one goal I knew as a coach to get buy-in and believe in from the players was to do something that they believed in and felt was making them better so they could pursue their dreams of playing at the next level. So instead of me trying to force a round peg into a square hole, I just decided to say, all right, let's look at the game of basketball first. And now let's figure out how we can do strength and conditioning that supports that, instead of saying we have to do it the way that it's always been done. So a lot of that just came from listening to players. And even, when I first started, I was still in my early 20s, so still rather young and spry, and was training myself all of the time. So I would use myself as a guinea pig. And I would say, well, what type of exercises do I like doing? What type of exercises do I think are most beneficial for me on the court in reducing my likelihood of getting injured and helping me be more explosive and in better condition? So it kind of created this perfect storm to go down that path. And because there weren't many people doing it specific for basketball at that time, I was able to kind of zig when everyone else was zagging, and it was able to create, if nothing else, some interest. You mentioned that folks said when you'd stop by Montrose, they'd say, hey, why don't you check out what the strength coach is doing? It wasn't that I was doing anything really special or magical. I was just doing something different than everyone else was. And I was doing something very basketball specific. So I'm so thankful for all of those opportunities and all of the players who were kind enough to let me use them as guinea pigs as I was trying to come up with my own philosophy. But to answer your original question, before I even got a chance to meet Coach Vetter, I had to go through David Atkins. And I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with Coach Atkins. He's had an amazing journey at the high school, college, and now at the NBA level. Is one of the finest coaches and skill development guys that I've ever met. He was incredibly impactful and influential in my life and taught me a lot. And it just so happens that I moved back from Elon to the DC area in '99. And I didn't become the strength coach at Montrose Christian until 2003. And that 4-year gap was me being incredibly persistent, banging on the door, proverbially, of course, to get an opportunity to work at Montrose. And, keep in mind of context, late 90s, early 2000s, the internet wasn't the internet the way that we know it today. And cell phones weren't as prevalent as they are today. So, I kid you not, I was handwriting letters. I was faxing. I was doing anything I could to get the attention of Coach Vetter. And one day I called the office and somebody picked up, and that person was Coach Atkins. And funny enough, the way the stars aligned, Coach Vetter had just recently tasked Coach Atkins with running their summer strength conditioning and skill development program. And he had assigned him that like the week before I called. So when I called and said, hey, this is what I do, he perked up immediately, because he's like, well, I've just been tasked with doing this and I don't know very much about it. He kind of knew what he did with the weights when he was playing in high school and college, but he had the vulnerability and the humility to acknowledge this was not his area of expertise. So there was some interest in what I could share. And I went over to the office. I sat down with Coach Atkins, hit it off immediately because he's just such an amazing human being and such a great coach. And we talked ball for hours. But then he said, I'm going to bring a player over to the gym and I'm going to let you work him out. And if he enjoys the workout and it goes well, then I'll let you work with our guys this summer. If he doesn't enjoy it or it doesn't go well, pretend that we never met. And if you know Coach Atkins, you could picture him saying that. And it just so happens that he brought me, and this will be a good throwback name for your listeners, Lennis Kleza, who was, an All-American caliber player, went and played at Missouri for 2 years, played in the NBA, an all-time icon and legend in Lithuania, but an absolute stud workhorse. And he brought Lennis over to the gym. I worked him out for about an hour and absolutely did everything I could to lay the hammer on that kid and try to do things that were fun, that were engaging, that were basketball specific. But I wasn't there to kind of pander. I absolutely hammered him, and he left, didn't say very much. And I wasn't sure what he thought about the workout, but within 10 minutes, Coach Atkins called me from the car and said, Lennis, absolutely loved it. You're in. When can we do this? When can we get going with our guys? And and then the rest is kind of history, as they say. I got an opportunity to start working with the players during the summer before Coach Vetter even knew that I was working with them. And after I was a few weeks in, then Coach Atkins walked me into the office and said, Coach, I want you to meet Alan. He's doing some strength and conditioning with our guys. He's gotten Lennis's, signature of approval on this. He's going to be a good fit for us this summer. Coach Vetter basically said, okay, well, you can have the summer, when the fall and when school resumes this fall, if our guys aren't noticeably bigger and stronger and in better shape, then you're out. And I took that challenge on, and thankfully guys made great progress. We're super committed all summer. And that was the beginning of what ended up being a 7-year stint at Montrose, which were some of the best times of my life.
Yeah, I think when, we'll move on from just the strength and conditioning portion of it, but I think it's just such an important part about your history and where it really stands in the game. And I think what people don't realize about hoopers is they do like being stronger. They do like being, like everyone thinks, oh, hoopers don't like to lift, but they just want it to be, productive. I think basketball is such a sport where you're on a clock all the time and you're competing every play in different ways. So when you go in that weight room, you want to have someone that you feel connected with that is going to make you feel better when that ball's up on the glass or that guy's out in front of you. And so finding creative ways to be able to do that really speaks to your ability to adapt, even sometimes on the fly.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, I mean, for me, it's interesting because when I look back in my early 20s and even late 20s, there were some areas of my life where I was incredibly hard-headed, incredibly stubborn, and overconfident, and wasn't open to listening or feedback. And obviously now at almost 48 years old, I can look back and smile and shake my head at the younger Alan for being so closed off and thinking he knew it all. But interesting enough, there were other areas where I was incredibly open and very receptive and wanted people's input. And thankfully, from a training standpoint, listening to the players and finding out what things they liked was always really important to me. On some level, I probably had some insecurity and just wanted them to like me as a coach and as a human being. But I knew the key to any type of progress in strength and conditioning was getting full focus and full effort and full commitment. Mm-hmm. And I also realized that in order to get those things from a player, they have to want to be there. They have to be all in. And I knew that the only way I could make that happen was by designing workouts that were specific to their needs and that were fun, things they enjoyed doing. And, many of them had said they didn't like the traditional football methodologies of training. They didn't want to be under the squat bar trying to see how much they could squat or doing some of the Olympic lifts or, prioritizing how much they could bench press when most of them weren't very good bench pressers. To them, it wasn't something in alignment with what they were trying to do. And it almost emasculated them to a point, because now you're making them do things that they don't like and they're not very good at. And when you have people do things they don't like and they're not very good at, it's hard to convince them to give a sustained effort and have great focus. So I figured out very quickly, we still have work that needs to get done, and I was going to push these players really hard. But if I could do it in a way that they were in for, that would make all the difference in the world. So I'm thankful that's the way things kind of unfolded. And all of it stems because I still identified as a basketball player. So I was still playing pickup all of the time in my 20s. And I knew what exercises made me feel better, which ones helped my body be more durable, which ones allowed me to jump higher and move quicker. And I would just kind of translate that to the players.
Now, were you a strength shoes guy or a jump soles guy?
I had the strength shoes. Yeah. Big, goofy white platform shoes. And I tell you, man, I mean, I was so committed to those things. I did them in high school. And I mean, I'd be out running miles in those things. Can't even imagine how ridiculous I must have looked. And I'd jump rope in them. I mean, I would do them until my calves were so sore. And I made some pretty good improvement. And, looking back, with the hopeful wisdom of an almost 50-year-old person who spent half of his career in the strength game, it wasn't that there was anything magical about the shoes, but when I put the shoes on, I was committed to putting in work. So I can't ever say that my improvement in vertical jump was a result of the shoes themselves. It may have just been a result of the fact that I was now jumping rope and running and doing plyometrics and cognizant of doing those things. But looking back on those things, they were just an injury waiting to happen. Man, was I committed, and I love those things.
It's so funny because I like you. I had both at some point. Like I had the strength shoes were more expensive, so
Yeah.
I started with the jump soles at first, and then I had a buddy who grew out of his, so then I was able to maneuver some strength shoes out of him. But everyone always say it's like your Achilles is gonna go and all these things, but I never really heard of anyone saying that happened. I only heard of people actually jumping higher and actually running faster.
Yeah, I mean, I do think they worked, and it's interesting because I mean, until you just brought that up, I probably hadn't thought about the strength shoes for 20, 25 years, and so they've certainly faded out. You don't see anybody running or using them today, but yeah, that was cool. And think about it. I mean, this is old school. I think I saw them in a magazine. I had to mail a check that my parents wrote in, and then they would ship them like 6 to 8 weeks later. And I can still vividly remember opening that box and thinking, these goofy looking shoes are the key to me being a high flyer and an over the rim player, which of course, none of those things ever happened. I could barely dunk a basketball on my best day. But boy, I was in and I was committed. And yeah, that was a fun part of the journey for sure.
Yeah, I remember saving up, basically through an entire summer and then into the winter a little bit to be able to afford them.
Yeah.
Because I had to pay, my mom and dad were like, if you want them, you gotta, you gotta earn it.
Yeah.
And so having those, I like what you said there though. Obviously, I like what you said about putting those shoes on means you're committed to the work.
Mhm.
That's like a really interesting thing. It's like, it's sort of just like when you say the hardest thing to do is get up in the morning and start your workout. And if you get up, you'll start it. But I never thought about the power of those shoes in the sense of if you're going to wear those goofy things around, you had to really be locked into getting better.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that was that was always my mindset as a player. And I tried to apply that to every single area. And that's why I love the work that I do today as a speaker and as an author. But I'm still so connected to all of those original principles that I use to, be a decent basketball player. I mean, I say that with a smile. And to be a basketball performance coach, like a lot of these hidden traits that you and I have been discussing for the last few minutes are incredibly applicable to every area of our life, and they're applicable to business. And I mean, think about one of the most important parts of what I've shared so far was the fact that I was able to and open to listening to what my players needed and listening to what my players wanted, so that I could create a program that would elicit the most buy-in and believe in from them. I mean, that is no different than being a parent, being a CEO or an entrepreneur, an executive, or if you're leading a sales team. Like, you have to be able to listen to your people. You have to be open to their feedback. You have to figure out what motivates them and what inspires them. One of the things I learned very early in all of my coaching career, that the coaching mantra is, it's not about me, it's about you. If I'm speaking to a player or a team, this is the workouts aren't what I want you to do. The workouts are what you need to do in order to reach your goals and your dreams. And, when you take your focus off of what you want from people and you put it on what you want for people, it's an absolute game changer. And I don't think I was really as cognizant or as clear of that when I was in my 20s as I am now. Some of those decisions, I think I just stepped into blindly. But now that I can connect the dots looking backwards, I do believe that's what allowed me to have such a great relationship with my players, and what allowed them to make really, really good progress was they were just as committed to doing the work as I was when I had on the strength shoes.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about your courage. Going and really seeing no strength coaches around, no speed trainers around, and having the courage to knock on doors and to make all those calls. And then, and I think I think you're like really inspiring to me, watching you take what you've learned in basketball and how you've been able to apply this as a speaker. And we've had some conversations through text about speaking, and I love how you've been able to do that. But what people don't realize is when you make the decision to go be a speaker, it's a major commitment. And so I want to talk to you about your courage and where you got your courage from to not be afraid to take a leap and try to be the first one there, and then to pivot your career and then go into speaking, engagement, and team connection. Where did you find that courage from? Was there a person in your life that exemplified that for you, or that pushed that for you?
Well, I appreciate your kind words. And it's funny, I don't think I've ever looked at it or framed it as courage. For a little bit of context, when I was in middle school, I had a coach give me, still to this day, what I consider to be the best piece of advice I've ever been given. And that's hard to anoint one piece of advice because so many people have poured so many wise words into me. But he said the key to being a high performer, the key to being successful, the key to being happy, like really you fill in the blank, is finding something that you're pretty good at and something that you love, and then find where those two things intersect. And if you can find the intersection between your natural talents and your passion, you want to invest as much time in that area as you can. He called that your strength zone. And he said, the more time and effort you can put working on your craft and working in your strength zone, you'll get a much better return from it. And I've followed that point of intersection my entire life. As we've already established, for the first 20 years of my life, that intersection was as a basketball player. I was decent at it and I loved it. And that was good enough to be able to play up through the collegiate level. When I realized that I didn't have the requisite talent to play the game professionally, then that point of intersection needed to move. And I decided to move it to being a basketball performance coach. It was something that I was still very passionate about, but I had some natural talent in my ability to communicate, my ability to inspire, my ability to teach. A lot of that I got from my parents, both of whom were elementary educators for 30 years. So I had a very strong respect and appreciation for teaching and for coaching, if you will. So I was still staying true to that intersection. And even when I decided to leave the training game in 2017 to pursue the corporate speaking full time, it still met that requirement. Passionate. I'm still incredibly passionate about speaking and sharing and pouring into others. And because I've been working on my communication and speaking chops all the way through my basketball coaching career, it's something that I've got some decent talent and acumen in. So I've still followed that point of intersection. And for me, that's my goal, is to always stay true to the things I'm pretty good at and the things I love to do. And the reason that point of intersection can and should and will change throughout our life is we will develop new talents and skills and we'll uncover new passions. If you would have asked me in high school if I thought 30 years later I'd be speaking to corporate audiences on stage, there's no way I would have known that. I didn't even know that was a thing back then. So we just have to stay open. And as much as I absolutely love being a professional speaker, I don't know where my intersection will take me 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now, but I always want to stay true to that. And the reason I share all of that is, for me, it didn't take much courage, because all I'm doing is following this point of intersection. And there were a couple of people very influential that showed me it was possible. One, I had never met him. I've since met him a few times. And when I mention his name, I'm sure almost all of your listeners will know who he is. But I had kind of always heard the urban legend of Tim Grover, who was Michael Jordan's trainer, later on to be Kobe Bryant's trainer. And, I'd read magazine articles on him, and in the infancy of the internet, I started reading and listening to what he was doing. So he proved the concept that one can make a full-time living as a private basketball trainer. So he kind of was the first person I was aware of that broke through that door or that ceiling and said it can be done. And that's really, really important, to have those types of people that show you what you want to do is possible. I didn't end up meeting him till many years later, but he was the one that said, if you want to make a living as a private strength and conditioning coach working only with basketball players, I at least know there's one guy in the world that's doing it, and that was all I needed. On a more local level, there was a gentleman named John Philbin, who at the time was an assistant strength and conditioning coach for the Washington Redskins. And he owned a fitness facility here in the Gaithersburg, Germantown area. And that's the gym that I used to train before and after school as a high school basketball player. And he was really influential in not only helping me prepare my mind and body to play the game, but he really planted the seed of, wow, maybe this is something I'll want to do. He loves being a strength and conditioning coach. He's really good at it. This man has had a huge impact on my life. Wow, that'd be pretty cool if I could have a job where I'm having this type of impact on athletes' lives too. So on a 30,000 foot level, Tim Grover showed me someone could do this and it's possible. On a very local level, someone that was an incredibly influential mentor, John Philbin, said, yeah, if you want to make a living, pushing high school athletes to their limit and getting them bigger, faster, stronger, you can absolutely do that. So both of those guys kind of helped put me on the path that I ended up taking.
Yeah, take me back to 2017. When you decide to make that pivot and to move on to that next point, just take me through a little bit of the mindset and like what goes on there. This platform has a lot of coaches, a lot of business professionals on it, and there's all these different points where you're going to push everything to the limit, and then it's time to make a pivot or make another adjustment. You seem to have been able to make these adjustments pretty easily, but I'm sure they've been much tougher than what they look like on a resume. So take me back to 2017 and just your mindset and your thinking as you make that pivot.
It's kind of crazy how the stars aligned on this. So it was actually about midway through 2016, I got an opportunity to speak at a basketball coaching clinic in Germany. And it had been my experience up until that point, that as global as the game had become, anyone coming out of the United States was kind of considered a rock star. So I loved going and speaking at international events because, everyone was incredibly gracious. They were so drawn to whatever came out of the States because of the NBA that they just treated you. If you ever needed an ego boost, all you got to do is go speak at a basketball clinic internationally. They'll make you feel really good about yourself. And I found myself getting ready to speak to this group of coaches in Germany. And I remember thinking, I'm not that excited to do this. I don't even really want to be here right now. And an alarm bell went off, a red flag went off. And I thought, here's an amazing opportunity to travel the world, speak to an incredible group of coaches, and I'm not that excited to do it. And it's that alarm bell started to lead me down the path that I was starting to get burnt out. That I still love the game. I still love the opportunities to work with players and coaches. I still did love speaking at clinics, but I just didn't have the same love that I had had 2, 3, 4, 5 years previously. And because my parents were teachers, and because I've had so many coaches that were impactful in my life, I've always had such a strong respect for teachers and coaches, and have always understood that those are two professions that you can't mail it in. Those are two professions that you can't go through the motions. If you are going to be entrusted to pour into young people, either in the classroom or on the court, you got to be all in. And I knew out of respect for players and coaches and respect for the game that if I was no longer all in, I needed to find something else to do. And I had always kind of in the back of my mind thought about being a professional speaker. A couple years prior to the Germany event, I was working the NBA Players Association's Top 100 camp. And at that camp, they brought in a speaker named Walter Bond, who's an incredible corporate keynote speaker now and has been for 20 years. And he came and he talked to everyone at the camp. And I remember sitting there just blown away by what a remarkable storyteller he was. Walter was captivating. He was funny. He was smart. He made us think. He made us laugh. He even made us shed a couple of tears. And I remember sitting there that day thinking, wow, this guy is amazing. He is a rock star to me. And I don't want to do that now. I'm loving what I'm doing, but one day I may want to do that. So as I started approaching burnout and I'm in Germany thinking, I don't want to do this anymore. I thought,
and when you say this, you mean speak about strength and conditioning?
No, when I was in Germany getting ready to speak to coaches, yes, then I thought, I don't want to do this, like strength and conditioning anymore. Gotcha. It's time for me to pivot and make a change. And I remember that seed that had been planted to do more motivational style speaking from Walter Bond. And I thought, maybe that's the direction I should go. Well, when I get back from Germany, a friend of mine that worked for a very renowned national fitness company called me up and said, we're having our annual retreat in Jamaica and our keynote speaker just fell through. Would you consider doing it? And I thought, this is crazy. Like I've been thinking to myself that maybe this is something I want to try to do. And now a pretty cool opportunity literally just fell in my lap. I joked with him and said, hey man, you had me at Jamaica. Yeah, I'll be there. And towards the end of summer of 2016, I gave my first official talk, which was a keynote in Jamaica to this fitness organization. And I knew the second I stepped off that stage, oh, this is it. This is my new calling. This is my new point of intersection. This is exactly what I felt alive. I felt energized. I mean, it's funny looking back now with 6 years of experience, that particular talk wasn't particularly good, not by my standards today. I mean, it was, I had a ton of emotion and energy, but it wasn't anywhere close to what I'm capable of doing now. But all the raw materials were in place. I had fun on stage. I enjoyed being on stage. I love the opportunity to share new material. It's the first time that I'm in front of people and I'm not demonstrating how to do lunges or how to do a jumping exercise. I'm actually talking to them about leadership and culture and communication and habits. And when I got off that stage, there was zero doubt in my mind. This is exactly what I need to be doing. And, I had to have some type of transition period. It's not like I could wake up the next morning, call all of my basketball training clients and say, sorry, I'm done. So I had about a 3 to 4 month phasing out process where I was doing less and less basketball and focusing more on developing my content, writing out a talk, practicing that talk, giving it in a few places for free just to get some reps. So there was about a 4 to 6 month transition. And then by the end of the first quarter in 2017, I completely untethered from everything basketball. And I went all in on the corporate keynote speaking, started getting some low paying gigs, but gigs nonetheless. And been off and running ever since. So it was just crazy how all of that aligned. I started to feel some burnout. I remembered Walter planting that seed. I get home, I get an invite to come to Jamaica. It feels great. I loved it, made the transition. And with under a year, I went from being a full-time basketball performance coach to being a full-time corporate keynote speaker. It was exhilarating to say the least.
Yeah, I love it. And just for our audience, Alan's a guy that I leaned on as I started diving more into speaking this year and in the future. I leaned on him a good bit. I think it was last summer, and just shot him a text and just wanted to have a conversation about how he went about it. And he gave me some excellent advice. So I always appreciate that. And I think what people don't realize, when you're you're doing strength conditioning, I'm doing X and O work as a coach. It almost gets boring. It's like, I can come in and do ball screen offense, not even have to work at it. But I think what I'm hearing from you that I also share with you, I enjoy having our audience leave with something that's going to help them be better. Mm-hmm. And I felt like the longer I was in it, I could give them more stuff: leadership, culture, belief, faith, love, by transitioning to talk one direction instead of just the X and O, or maybe for you, it's the stretch band, or, the number of jumps you have to do, and my parents are both teachers, your parents are both teachers. So I think we kind of share that commonality of wanting to have impact with others in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, I think that's a major feather in the cap for both of us in the speaking world, is that we came from the coaching world, which was always about action. It was always about, these are the things you need to do. If you want to improve your strength and fitness, here's exactly what you need to do. Here's what you need to do when you come in for workouts with me. Here's what you need to do on your own time. If you want to become a better player on the court, well, here's some drills you can do with us in our workouts and practices. Here's some things you need to do on your own during the unseen hours. The coaching world is very actionable. Whereas I found that many times, especially in the speaking world, in the corporate realm, it wasn't as actionable. A lot of times it was just kind of this rah. And I'm not saying that to diminish traditional motivation or speakers. There's a time and a place where a dose of inspiration and motivation and a story is really helpful. But at the end of the day, as coaches, we understood it was about behavior change. It was about getting people to actually take what we were teaching them and put it into action. I can talk to you about footwork, but unless you're going to put in the hours in the gym working on your footwork, then you're never going to be able to recall that during a game, and you're not going to be a better player. So I've taken, and I know you do as well, that same approach to what we do on the corporate side now, which is, I want to give you tangible things that you can implement immediately, that are practical and actionable, so you can improve in these different areas. And, the two lanes that I spend most of my time now are helping people improve their individual performance, so that they can show up as their best selves and make a maximum contribution to their organization. So, I talk to them a lot about habits and mindset and focus. And same thing, I want to give you some tangible, actionable ways you can up-level your habits and improve your mindset and improve your focus. The other lane I swim in is organizational performance. How do we get everybody to play nicely together in the sandbox? And how do we improve cohesion and collaboration and culture? And I found that things like role clarity and accountability and communication are the linchpins of that. And same thing, I give teams very specific actionable things they can do to improve role clarity and to heighten accountability and to make their communication more effective. So for me, the actionable part is just ingrained into who I am. And that stems from coaching. So I think you and I, at the risk of sounding like lacking humility, we should be very grateful for our coaching roots and be very grateful because we have something to offer this corporate space that I think many people had just taken for granted.
Yeah, I think one thing that, again, like talking coaching and consulting and speaking, one thing that I think as a coach that you sort of naturally have to do, because everyone on your team isn't at the same level, you have to evaluate where this person is, where they are right now in this current moment. And then from there, you have to evaluate how they can get where you need them to get or where they can go to. And some people just have a lack of capability to expand beyond a certain means. And so it's having a full understanding of how much growth a person can truly have. And really, you can't understand that growth unless you get to know who that person is, unless you get to know their motivations. You sort of do that. Like, they gave you Linus as the first person to work with because he's really driven, really tough. Right. And so like if you were going to break him in a workout, then that would mean that workout's really tough. Yeah. But if you're going to inspire him, that's kind of the perfect personality because he wants it, wants to improve, wants to be his best.
When it comes to leadership, when it comes to building high performing teams, there are some foundational and fundamental principles that have such high utility. They apply in any area. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're talking about basketball, business, the military, or anything in between. Some of these principles, they apply anywhere. And so when someone would question, because trust me, I've faced that question plenty of times, how could a basketball guy help our business? I mean, even in my first couple of years, people are like, you've never even had a corporate job in your life, Alan. How are you going to come in here and share? And the answer was twofold. The answer is, first and foremost, these fundamental principles have such high utility that like a team is a team. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a nuclear family, a college basketball team, or a Fortune 100 business. A team is a team, and there are some components that transcend all of those. Same thing from a leadership standpoint. It doesn't matter what area of life you're leading. There are these principles that can mesh. So as long as we're talking high level general principles, then they would absolutely apply. But then the other thing that I would say to them, and I still hold true to this because I've still never had a corporate job, is there is a massive advantage to fresh eyes and a fresh perspective. That if your organization, let's say in business, if you keep relying on doing things the way you've always done them, or that's the way we've always done it, things can get stale. And if you're not constantly looking at them with new and fresh eyes, that's going to be to your detriment. So I've always been a big believer in bringing in outside voices and outside perspectives to help. And I would say the same thing to a basketball coach. I'd say to a basketball coach, if the only leadership training you get is by studying other basketball coaches, you are limiting yourself. You should be studying great leaders in business, great leaders in the military, great leaders in other sports. If you're at the high school level and you're a basketball coach, are you making time to sit down with the football coach, the softball coach, the volleyball coach, and learn from them? What are they doing to build culture? What are they doing to improve role clarity? Because if you're not doing those things, if you're not looking outside of the frame that you're in, you're limiting yourself. And so I've always been a huge believer in that. And I won't take this too far off tangent because I do want to answer your original question. But even now as a professional speaker, studying other speakers makes up a very small percentage of the pie of what it is that I study to improve my speaking game. I have a huge love and respect for hip hop and for stand-up comedy. Two other unbelievable spoken word art forms that I study religiously to find ways to improve my ability to communicate. Now, to no surprise to you or your listeners, I will never be a hip hop star, and I'll never be on Netflix for being a stand-up comedian, but that's not my goal. My goal is to use portions of each of those crafts and apply them as a corporate keynote speaker. So for anyone listening, whatever lane you're in, whatever industry you're in, don't confine yourself to only learning from that, that finite group. Step outside of that and try to learn from everywhere. My good friend and mentor, Jay Billis, taught me something very early in my career that's really on point with what we're talking about. And he said, every single person in the world knows something that you don't. And you know something that everybody else doesn't. And the whole goal of self-improvement is to figure out what someone else knows that you don't, so you can add that to your arsenal, and then be kind enough to share the things to others that you have that will add value to their lives. And if you go into every interaction with an open mind and an open heart, saying, this person knows something I don't, and I'm curious and fascinated and competitive enough to want to try and figure out what that is, that's how you'll never stop growing and never stop improving. Now, to your original question, the KDs, the Steph Currys, the Kobes, there are three specific traits that unite those guys in particular, but then I've found unite high performers of every single industry. The first is they never get bored with the basics. They have a very strong respect and appreciation for the fundamentals. They don't try to skip steps. They work on mastery of the basics relentlessly, especially during the unseen hours. Number two, those guys have learned how to blend confidence with humility. They've earned the right to be confident because they've put in the work, especially during the unseen hours. They've gotten in the repetitions to earn the right to be confident, but they brush that with a massive stroke of humility, which is what allows them to stay open to coaching. It allows them to stay open to feedback. And it reminds them that no matter how good they are, they still believe they can get better. Even the guys you just mentioned, according to some folks, each of those three guys at some point has been the best player in the world. Right. And that was never enough for them. They're not worried about being the best player in the world. They're worrying about being the best player they're capable of. So even if they are anointed the best player in the world, can they still improve in certain areas? Can they still add a new move to their game? Can they still get a little bit better defensively? Can they still improve their basketball IQ or raise their ability to lead others? And their answer to that is yes, I can absolutely still improve. And that's where the humility comes in. And then the third component is those guys and all high performers I've ever been around, they engage the process. They acknowledge that goals are important, that outcomes are important, especially in sport and business. You are measured by wins and losses and profits and losses. But they understand the best way to get the desired outcome or results is by drilling down into the process and knowing that there are steps that needed to be taken in order to get to that level. And that if your goal is to win an NBA championship, there are a series of things that you need to do individually and a series of things that your team needs to do collectively every month, every week, every day, down to every hour to increase the likelihood of that happening. And they focus incessantly on the process. And when you can focus on the process and love the work and do the work and have consistency and have discipline, then you increase the chance that you're going to get the result that you want. The result is never guaranteed. Outcomes are never guaranteed. How do I apply that in speaking? Of course, I want to get a standing ovation at the end of a talk. Of course, I want to get, amazing reviews from everyone that attended. But those are outcomes. I have no control over any of that. What I put my focus on is, am I delivering customized, relevant content? Am I getting on stage and showing an appropriate amount of energy and compassion and delivering it in a captivating way? Am I easy and enjoyable to work with? The people that actually hired me, am I making their life easier by having me at their event, or am I making their life harder? And if I can focus on, delivering content in a captivating way and being enjoyable to work with, that's what I control. And that's the process I stick with. And I found that when I do those things, then I tend to get some of the results a lot more often than if I don't.
That's beautifully well said. And it's beautifully well said in the way that the very best see the world, and they see their world. A lot of times people think leaders are sort of like born. And I think there's some people, if you're the oldest in your family of 10, you might end up having some leadership ability. But I really think that most leaders become leaders because they have to. It's like if the Lakers lose, it was going to be on Kobe Bryant. It wasn't going to be on Sasha Vujacic. So he had to become a leader because otherwise, like, so he had to become the leader that they needed. Like Batman. Every time they talk about Batman, they're like, he's the leader, he's the hero that we needed, and they kind of go back and forth. When you watch these guys grow as leaders, um, what are some of the things? I mean, you talk about what you saw in them when you had a chance to work out with them. What are some of the things that have surprised you with their ability to lead organizations as they got older?
Well, one of the things I found most interesting was that leadership style, again, we have fundamental leadership principles that have such high utility, they cross all boundaries. But then we also have to acknowledge that every leader is different, just like every human being is different. And everyone's going to have a slightly different leadership style. Some guys, and you've been around basketball long enough to know that some of your best leaders were more vocal, where others maybe weren't as vocal, but certainly led by example. And then when they did have something to say, it carried a massive impact because they didn't speak up very often. I mean, look at, that reminds me of a player like Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan was rather reserved and stoic, both on and off the court, but one of the best leaders that the game has ever seen. And he led in a very different way than, say, somebody like Kobe Bryant or a Michael Jordan, whom we saw on The Last Dance, was incredibly vocal and in your face, telling you what you needed to be doing. Both of them were iconic Hall of Fame caliber players that led dynasties in their respective organizations, but they did it their own way. And I believe self-awareness and authenticity and doing and leading in ways that match your personality type, your leadership style is incredibly important. As soon as you try to be somebody else and try to just, carbon copy somebody else's leadership style, you can run into issues. And I know that from experience because, and I think a lot of coaches probably go through this. When I first started coaching, I was a mere copycat of the 3 or 4 coaches that had the most impact on me by the time I was in my early 20s. So, I'm trying to do and say things the way they would do them. And it's kind of like putting on a shirt that doesn't really fit. Like, all right, this isn't me. But I think that's a normal rite of passage. So I'm not saying that to diminish my younger self, but as I started to get more reps in the coaching world, I started to develop my own voice and my own philosophy and say, okay, well, I kind of like the way he does this over here, but I like the way he does this over here and this. What's the most authentic way for me to do this? And now, and same thing with speaking. I mean, when I first got into speaking in 2017, I was looking at other speakers and being like, oh yeah, I want to be like that, or I want to be like that. And would, slowly kind of take from them until I felt comfortable enough in my own skin and my own voice to do and be the speaker that I believe I'm capable of and am now. So I think that's part of the process. But most importantly, you have to have the self-awareness to know what things you do well, what things you don't, your biggest talents and gifts and the ways you can make a maximum contribution, but also be aware of your blind spots and your insecurities and your fears, and just be willing to embrace all of that, mix it all together, and you have who you are as a human being. And once you feel comfortable and confident in your skin as a human being, then you can step into being comfortable and confident as an effective and impactful leader.
I love everything about it. Well, we do this thing here on Last Call. It's the end of the night. The bartender has rung the bell, and it's the last call. You got 2 people beside you. On your left, you have someone who's retired. On your right, you have someone who's still actively working. No family. What 2 people do you want beside you at the end of the night?
Ooh, love that. Really innovative and original question. So, as far as retired, and I know he's kind of dipping his toe back into the game now, but I'm going to say Coach K, Hall of Fame caliber coach from Duke, who has been coaching longer than I've been breathing. But I first became aware of Coach K's philosophy, if you will, when I read Leading with the Heart, one of his first books that came out in the late 90s. And I just had a massive paradigm shift after reading that book. Like it really solidified the way that I felt I wanted to approach being a leader and being a part of teams. And I've had a chance to meet and talk with Coach K on numerous occasions, and have devoured all of his books and consumed as much of his content as humanly possible. And that's somebody that, even though we don't have a personal relationship outside of meeting a few times, his philosophy and his work has had a massive impact on my life. So I'm going to put Coach K on the retired side. And then on the still working side, I mentioned him before, and he's also a Duke alum, but I'm going to pick Jay Billis. Jay's most of his work now is with ESPN, but Jay also does some speaking like you and I do, and is just an absolutely, first of all, he's a great human being, but he's absolutely brilliant in so many different ways. And he's had a huge impact as both a friend and a mentor, taught me so much about the importance of preparation and details and due diligence, and kind of be there before you get there. And then once you're there, and there could be, on camera in front of millions of people on ESPN, or it could be in a boardroom speaking to 15 executives. But then once you're there, just be in the moment and be of service, and be there to fill other people's buckets, smile, enjoy the fact that you have an opportunity to be there. Don't take yourself too seriously. So it's this nice juxtaposition of take the work seriously, do the due diligence during the unseen hours, prepare relentlessly, have discipline. But then when you get there, it's okay to smile. It's okay to have a good time. It's okay to let the air out, if you will, and just be of service. And I think he blends those as well as anybody I've ever met. So my last call, I'm going to have Coach K and Jay Billis at my side.
I love it. Big shout out to Jay Billis, a big fan of the show. He checks us out. He retweets our stuff and shoots me texts every now and again when he listens and stuff. So big shout out to Jay Billis. Alan, my friend, where can we find you?
The easiest place is my site, which is alansteinjr.com. That's kind of a hub for everything I have going speaking wise. I also try and be incredibly accessible and responsive on social media, and try to post what I hope is helpful and useful content in a consistent stream. I'm at Alan Stein Jr. On Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. If anyone's interested in either book that I've written, Raise Your Game or Sustain Your Game, you can just do a quick search on Amazon or Audible or wherever you get your books and audio books. I do love hearing from folks. I love the engagement part of social media. So if any part of this resonated, just shoot me a DM on Instagram or LinkedIn. I'm very good about getting back with folks. And of course, if anybody listening is looking for a high energy speaker to speak to your team or your company, I know Coach Jamie and I would love to be able to do that. So yeah, this has been so much fun. You led an awesome conversation, got me thinking about some things that honestly I hadn't thought about in a while. So keep up your great work, man. I really appreciate all that you do.
I appreciate it. That's Jamion Christian, Alan Stein on Last Call. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for joining us on The Last Call, powered by Speakeasy, where careers grow through relationships and relationships grow through Speakeasy. We hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.